We started thinking about surrogacy back in 2019, and the whole process, end to end, took about 6 years. But it wasn't always great, not at the beginning. I remember after our first transfer, the clinic called to tell us that the betas were negative. But there was a bigger problem that caused the transfer to fail. There was no progesterone in our surrogate system. She hadn't been taking her shots.
Most people who go through surrogacy assume the system is built to protect them. The agency, the process, the people managing it, they assume someone is watching. We assume that too. We were wrong. Today, we're telling you the story of what happened when we trusted that system, what it cost us, what we lost, and what we decided to do instead. Is there a better path to building a family through surrogacy? One that gives you more control, more transparency, and doesn't require handing thousands of dollars to a middleman before you've met even a single person? We think so. I'm Daniel Malak. Joining me today are my co-founders, Joshua Brost, who will break down exactly how the agency fee structure works and why the math doesn't hold up, and Samantha Martin, our surrogate and third founder of Pineapple Family, who's going to tell you what this journey actually looks like from the other side. No agency spin, no sales pitch, just real conversations about what it actually takes. This is Family Fronds, a Pineapple Family original.
So Danny, take us back to 2019. You and Josh were planning your family. Where were you emotionally? And what did the path to surrogacy look like from where you were standing at that point?
I mean, we were clueless. We had no idea. I had no clue where to even begin. Like, we went to so many different mixers. There was so much content online, which either was academic or totally clinical, or some crazy content that told us what we were even considering was wrong. So mentally, I feel like I was just in a haze, and I knew that it was going to be a second job. What about you, Josh? Where were you?
I mean, we both knew from the time we were together, like very early on, that we wanted kids, and we knew that this was the path we had to take. And so we started going. There was I think a men having babies mixer near our house where we lived in San Francisco at the time, where they had rented or reserved a classroom at a local school, and it was in the Castro district of San Francisco, and a room full of gay men. We actually ran into people we knew from work who were at the same mixer. And one of the things that somebody finally asked, but it wasn't until later. People were almost afraid to ask, like, what is this going to cost? Right. And I remember we all wanted to leave with that information, but nobody wanted to be the one to broach the subject. And to Danny's point, we were clueless. We had no idea what we needed to be doing, where we needed to be going, who we needed to be talking to, or what any of this would look like.
We were so naive. Remember when they told us, like, the first time I said, okay, well, could we possibly consider having kids within like a year, maybe a year and a half?
And they laughed at us.
And everybody chuckled hard, like very hard chuckle. They're like, okay, take anything that you think in terms of months and timing off the table and just let the process happen. We didn't know that the process was going to take 6 years.
We had no idea. And then, 2019, as we all know, very quickly rolled into early 2020 when the world shut down.
Was there something weird that happened that year?
No. What happened? Yeah, we didn't leave our house for a year.
Can't remember.
So, we went to, I think, that men having babies info session in San Francisco. And then we went to an agency mixer. And I think that agency mixer was December of 2019, I want to say. And those were the only two in-person things we were able to do. And then the world completely shut down. So we did most of our initial surrogacy process during the pandemic.
Yeah. So the agency mixer that you guys went to, is that the same agency that you ended up choosing?
It is not.
No.
Actually, so I'll just go here for a moment. We went to the agency mixer we went to was one of the largest agencies in the country, had a mixer. And one thing that struck me, and I actually said this to the agency rep. I don't want to call him a sales rep because I don't think they call themselves that. But after going to that mixer, it was very apparent that we were in a CRM system, that's customer relationship management system, that like told them when to call us, when to send us emails, how to try to close the deal. And I do know it was the end of the year because I think we got a call in December and the sales pitch was, well, our prices are going up next year, but if you sign your contract, you'll save, you'll get this year's prices, which, Danny and I both worked in tech at the time. And I was like, oh my God, are you selling me software? Is this a SaaS product?
But remember, this is also like set the scene. We had 2 glasses of champagne. We were in a true
At the mixer.
ballroom style mixer, dimly lit room with some party lights on, fully catered, which I thought it was an adult prom, which was great. But when you think about why we were there, it was just kind of strange. Like, oh, okay, well, we're toasting to get financially bankrupted, but we didn't know it at the time.
So the agency that you were introduced to through a referral, what made you go with them?
I think we went with them because we didn't think there was any other option. When you're starting out with any process like building a home or buying a car, you go to what you believe is the established resource, like a dealership or a retail store that sells products that you'd use. And so we went to an agency because that's the path that was directly in front of us. And I think that wasn't necessarily like the best path for us, just based on the experience that we had.
Yeah. So we used a service. We were so overwhelmed that we ended up using a service to help us find a surrogate. And this service was able to pull profiles from all of the various agencies and present them to us. And so what really happened is there was the profile of a surrogate that resonated with us enough for us to say, yeah, we'd love to meet her. We'd love to talk to her. And she was through the agency we ended up going with. So picked the person, not the agency. And then because that surrogate was with that agency is how we ended up with them.
Okay. Yeah, kind of to what Danny said. I feel like that was similar for me too, that it just seems like the agency is the way to go because that's what's out there. So and when you're new and you're starting out, you don't know anything.
We had no idea.
Yeah.
The concept of doing this on our own, we would have thought you had 3 heads if you had recommended that.
So Josh, from a practical standpoint, what did the agency tell you that your $45,000 was buying?
Well, I don't know if buying's the right word, right? But it was
Paying for?
we're obviously introducing you to the surrogate, right? We've already screened her to a point. Obviously, we knew we still had to do the medical screening and all of that. We have this network of providers and we're going to make it really easy to get through the process, right? Because there's so many moving pieces, which is true, right? There's so many moving pieces within a surrogacy and egg donation journey. But they knew, they had a network of lawyers and doctors and psychologists and all of these people, and they were going to move the process so easily. Right. So that was a big part of what we were going to pay for. And it was, peace of mind. So we really thought that, we were going to meet the surrogate. They were going to handle pretty much everything. And it was going to be smooth sailing.
Did you guys get the surrogate that you intended to get?
Yeah, that's who we ended up with in the first time around.
Okay.
Well, we can talk about that, but it's who was presented to us, right? And who those first few, we now know, heavily coached conversations were versus what it ended up being were 2 totally different things.
So I'm curious. So at my agency, they showed the parents the profile, and then if they picked us as the surrogates, then they got the profile, or then we got the profile, and then if that worked, we did a match call that was mediated with the agency. Did that work similar to how it was for you guys?
Yeah, it was similar. We had I don't know how they. We obviously reached out to them through the third-party company that we had helping us to find a surrogate. So they already knew we were interested in the surrogate we were interested in. I have to imagine that agency says, hey, this family is interested in you. Are you interested in a match call? And we did have a match call. And that was a great call.
Do you feel like you guys were able to talk and lead that conversation yourself, or was it more the agency facilitating it?
I felt like it was really choreographed.
In hindsight. In
In
hindsight,
hindsight,
we look back
yeah.
and it definitely felt almost media trained.
I mean, if you don't know anything about what you're getting into, some aspect of that felt a bit reassuring. Because somebody's sitting in front of you and they're telling you, here's how the call is going to go. But what I thought was, as an intended parent, I'm going to have a coordinator that's going to help guide the conversation around subjects and topics that I would care about or that I needed to know about, like insurance or stop time, communication methods, boundaries for each person involved. I mean, at the end of the day, this person that you're getting into an agreement with on paper is actually someone you're getting into a relationship with for 18 months. They're carrying your child. Or more, yeah. And so I thought that the conversation was going to be about those topics, and it really was just almost like an arranged marriage type interaction. So very choreographed, in my opinion.
So did you get an opportunity to ask any of those questions, or were they just like, this is like the path, these are the questions that we're going to ask, and you can't really ask anything outside of that?
It felt like it was teed up for medical clearance. Like the conversation was more geared towards preparing the body and not necessarily preparing the mind.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of values conversations, and the ones, and I do recall this, the ones that there were, we were asked in advance what we wanted to talk about. Like, oh, do you have and it was positioned perfectly innocently, and I'm not going to say that it was ill intent, but it was like, oh, if there's things that you want to talk about, let me know so I can make sure that she's prepared to talk about them.
So Danny, without getting into specifics that you obviously can't share, like what happened and when did you realize that the agency had no accountability mechanism for what happened?
After we got a really devastating phone call where we found out about what actually happened after the transfer, we felt like any intended parent who's hopeful and wanted to start a family that just learned that that was not going to be a dream that was going to be fulfilled anytime soon. We did exactly what those people would do. We were heartbroken, but we wanted to get some consolation from the agency, from the coordinators, from the people involved. And I don't know what I was more devastated by, the fact that this news effectively changed the course of our family building in that moment, or the fact that the agency just didn't really care. They reacted as if they had heard that before, they had gone through that experience before, and it didn't even faze them. In fact, they didn't really show any accountability at all. They put a lot of that back on us, put it back on our plates. Like they blamed our clinic. They blamed everyone other than who ultimately should have been responsible.
I'm going to put a little bit of a finer point, though, because you asked what happened. And so in broad strokes, without getting into specifics for reasons that we can't. So, Danny talked about it at the start of the podcast, but betas fail, right? Like people have transfers that don't work, right? That happens all the time in IVF, in surrogacy. It's something that I think everybody needs to be prepared for when they go through this process. That is not the problem statement, right? That is something that happens, and it's heartbreaking every single time that it happens, no matter the reason. We were emotionally prepared that the transfer might not take. But then that next statement, your surrogate doesn't have any progesterone in her system. She hadn't been taking the shots. That was the twist the knife moment, right? And there are things that happened leading up to that moment that were pretty big red flags. And I don't want to I don't want to accidentally name names or anything like that. But, when she came to San Francisco for her medical clearance, she brought a travel companion who was related to her, who was lovely, who is also a gay man. And, she was saying, I'm doing this because I hope somebody does this for him someday. And that was really meaningful for us. But when she came for the transfer, she came with somebody who we had been told was no longer in her life. And so that was already, we were like, oh, maybe we misunderstood. Maybe we were confused. Okay. And then we had the transfer. We all went out to lunch. And then we had found out that this person had a past that in our minds would have been incompatible with like psych screening, ASRM guidelines, those sorts of things. And at that point, the transfer had already happened, right? So to fast forward 2 weeks, find out the betas were negative and that she had no progesterone in her system, sort of like the pieces were falling into place that yes, she may have been medically ready, which is what our clinic was responsible for evaluating, but was she psychologically ready? Was she properly vetted outside of being medically vetted? I mean, ASRM guidelines have some, it's not just can your body handle it.
Right.
So when that happened and we talked to and I want to like be very transparent, like we were devastated. We knew we couldn't go with her, right? We couldn't trust her. We couldn't trust that she'd take medication, so we couldn't do another transfer with her. But we still thought that we would have to rematch through the agency, right? Through the same agency, because they already had our money. We knew the contract said no refunds, nothing's guaranteed. The interesting thing is that particular agency tried to blame our clinic for the fact that she had no progesterone in her system. They tried to blame our clinic for the psych screening that they had set up, right? And it ended up being really wild. And then on top of that, they had rematch interviews for us in days. And they had us talk to 3 or 4 different people in the course of a week and a half. And anybody who's
So actual match calls,
yes,
or they're just sending you profiles?
no, calls.
Wow.
And so
Yeah, it was
anybody,
like they tell you, "Oh, it's gonna take so long to match because that's just part of the process." But then if it fails, it was crazy. Like they had 3 different individuals ready for us within the following week. So we were just like, "Okay, well, where are these rematches coming from?"
exactly.
Yeah,
So you
I mixed
hear about
that
these
up.
18-month wait lists or longer, and this agency had 3 or 4 people to talk to us within a week and a half. There are so many red flags.
Yeah. So I'm curious, who told you guys the news? Like your clinic called you, and then like what happened after that? Did the agency reach out to you guys, or did you have to reach out to them?
We had to reach out to them. I remember that very specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our clinic called us. I mean, to make matters worse, I actually had to take a work trip and I was on a delayed flight home. So the call came to Daniel before I landed. So I landed to a flurry of text messages and sobbing voicemails that I needed to call him immediately.
So after it all fell apart, what was the conversation like between the two of you? What was the moment that you decided you weren't going to go through this with this particular agency again?
It was really all about trust. I mean, at the end of the day, you wanna know that you're trusting someone with your time, with your money, with a lot of intimate details. And we couldn't even trust their version of the facts, let alone any other detail. So we were highly skeptical. We knew that we needed time to grieve. And after that, it just didn't feel like a right next move to go back to the agency. Oh, Josh, you've dug into the agency fee structure, and I feel like you know a lot about how it actually works. Like, I want to know what your take is. What does that $30,000 to $60,000 like actually fund?
Yeah. So it's, I want to preface this by saying every agency is different. So I'm going to talk in broad strokes and, agency A might be slightly different than agency B and agency C. But in broad strokes, what that agency fee usually gets you is a case manager who handles introductions and helps to make that match. Somebody who can help coordinate communications. And I use the word coordinate loosely because they also gatekeep a lot of communications. And so it's, making sure the parties don't say anything that would be detrimental to the match. They often ensure that paperwork and milestones are met. But you have to remember the medical clearance that's done by an IVF clinic, the legal work is done by separate attorneys. Some agencies have in-house attorneys, and, we can talk about the structural conflict of interest that creates. Escrow should be managed by a third party. Again, some agencies have internal escrow, which again, we should talk about why that's not great. But really the agency fee is matchmaking and some light coordination.
So what do the agencies tell parents that they're getting versus what they are actually getting?
So it's interesting because I think agencies try to sell this version of you need our knowledge, but really what you're paying for is a lack of knowledge and opacity in the system. that depends on agencies having access to information or knowing things about how this process works that the average intended parent, the average surrogate, the average egg donor does not. A lot of agencies talk about their vetting process, right? But let's be really clear. Clinics do the medical vetting. Psychologists do the psych vetting and the psych screening. Whatever the agency has layers on top of that. And those are usually more aligned to the agency's corporate risk profile or how they can move, frankly, people through the pipeline most efficiently, not what the ASRM guidelines actually are or what a clinical psychologist says is a good match or somebody who's ready to go through this process.
And like I remember when we were going through the agency process, you are a part of all of the appointments. You're still the one talking to a lawyer, talking to a psychologist, talking to anybody who you have a medical appointment with or otherwise. So I just think that overall, it wasn't like a set it and forget it experience. An agency doesn't buy you that complete peace of mind. You're still involved. And I know that like after we did decide to go independent, we were already armed with a lot of information just by the very nature of a bad experience with an agency. But I'm curious, Josh, like what do you think you learned going independent? Like what was actually possible for you?
Yeah, I think, from my point of view, what I learned going independent is how little the agency actually did for us. If you think about what independent surrogacy required of us versus what we thought the agency was going to do, right? We had to coordinate medical appointments with the IVF clinic. We had to do that when we were at the agency as well. We had to coordinate psych screenings. We didn't have, and we can talk about that, but we didn't have to do that with the agency the first time to our detriment, we have found out. We had to coordinate appointments with lawyers, which we did with the agency, we did independently. A lot of what we ended up doing independently was still stuff that we had to coordinate on our own through the agency. The difference is that we were finding our own providers. We weren't calling the provider the agency told us we had to use, if that makes sense. I mean, well, you were there. You remember this.
Makes sense to me. Yeah, I remember actually preferring that, quite frankly, because at that point, I mean, I felt so strung out by the process that I was determined to actually get directly in front of every single provider and learn more about their business, their intentions, how they were going to help us. I can only imagine what you thought of us, Sam, by the time we kickstarted this with you. I mean, you and Josh have a past relationship from high school, but like I'm curious to your take. Like, what did you think of how messy we were when you first really realized the experience was going to happen with us?
Didn't see you guys as messy. I saw you as people who wanted a baby and got their heart broke, and I wanted to ensure that I could make the process smooth for you in any way that I could, having had already gone through it. I feel like I was just able to guide you through that and kind of a little bit of hand holding, like it's going to be okay. Like it's a lot of trust in this process. So I feel like some of that was already there, but that you guys needed a little bit more reassurance and things. And if that meant that I had to send you a video of me taking a shot, then that was okay with me.
We needed a lot of bit of
You
reassurance.
need a
And
lot of
thank you
reassurance.
again for all of those videos. I feel like I've seen so much more of you, frankly, any woman than I ever thought I would see in my grown adult male life. But
As
this is where
can
we are.
can let me just tell you, so, we obviously had the experience we had with our first surrogate not taking her injections. But Sam, I remember when you came out from medical clearance and we went to see my favorite movie at the Symphony. Do you remember they were doing the
Mhm.
Goonies
Yeah.
at the Symphony? So the Symphony was actually playing the SF Symphony, the score to the Goonies while we watched it. And I remember you had to go and take your shot while we were at the Symphony and you were your ampule of, I don't remember what was it progesterone? Was that the medicine?
Yep.
But you put it in your cleavage to warm it up so that it was easier. And then like went into the bathroom and you're like, somebody probably thought I was doing something I wasn't supposed to be.
Oh, I totally felt like a like a drug user. Absolutely. But whatever, I did what I needed to do. And the bathroom is not my favorite place to do anything, but I did it.
You did it. But I got to tell you, like after the experience we have, and then that experience with you, I never again worried about medical compliance or anything else. And like this woman just like literally brought progesterone in her cleavage into a symphony bathroom to make sure that she took her shot at the exact moment her watch said she had to take her shot.
Now that is commitment.
Yeah, I just like I felt so bad for you guys. My heart just broke. So I'm just like I was okay with it, you know. I didn't think it was too much. So I hope you guys didn't think that it was too much or felt bad because we were in it together. So
We appreciate that. I mean, there's definitely times where we're like, oh my God, we're going to make this woman crazy.
I would have told you,
I think you did once or twice.
back off. I know what I'm doing.
So what was the moment for you? I'm curious, Sam. Like, when did you go from I'm going to be caring for you to I'm going to be part of your family? When did you make that switch?
Think me and Josh kind of talked about this earlier, but I think like when I first heard of what happened and that the transfer didn't take, I kind of just thought in my head, you know, I only intended to do surrogacy once, but this is why I wanted to do surrogacy because it was easy for me to get pregnant, but I had a lot of friends that just did not have an easy time with that. So I was just said if I got the opportunity to help a friend through it, that I would do that. But then like I was getting older and it never happened. So that's why I went with an agency and did it the first time. But as you guys know, like I am a firm believer in that everything happens for a reason. So when Josh reached out, like obviously I didn't think that this is what it would lead to, but it did. And so when I heard that it didn't work, I'm like, well, this is an opportunity for me to do what I had initially intended to do. So if I was asked, I would probably say yes. So it was a thought before you guys even asked.
So
Okay.
obviously we've talked a lot about the cost of surrogacy. Really, that's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds when they go into this process. And there is a lot of chatter where folks say they charge too much. But Josh, your point of view is that it's really something more structural than that. What's your take? What's your real take?
Yeah, absolutely. So overall, I mean, I would sum it up as that the entire industry has a transparency problem. And
Mhm.
I firmly believe that that is by design. It's not accidental. I think that the industry depends on lack of knowledge, lack of availability of knowledge in order to justify their fees. But going even deeper than that, let's just talk about, transparency in general. So let's talk about SEEDS, the Society for Ethics in Egg Donation and Surrogacy. It is a self-governing, self-regulated body meant to create the policies that the entire industry is supposed to adhere to, but it's created by egg donation and surrogacy agencies. So the people who are governed by the rules are the ones writing the rules. And as far as I can tell, digging through their website, digging through their rules, they don't have any enforcement mechanism. They don't have any independent oversight. It's, completely self governing. And, one of the things, we were talking about escrow. As I understand it, SEEDS has a guidance or a rule that agencies shouldn't have in house escrow. But some of their marquee agency members do have in-house agency escrow, and they're still SEEDS members. And so when you go to these, surrogacy communities online, people talking about surrogacy, you'll hear a lot of people saying, well, make sure they're a SEEDS member. And they've delivered this, sort of branding in the market that if you're a SEEDS member agency, you are clearly ethical and vetted. And as far as I can tell, that isn't necessarily true. Unlike ASRM, they're accountable to, medical guidelines, medical reporting, FDA reporting. They submit to peer-reviewed studies. I just haven't seen any of that I can find about SEEDS. Let's look at some corporate ownership in the surrogacy world. So 3 of the largest agencies in the US, surrogacy agencies, are actually rolled up under a single private equity group. So they're rolled up into something called North Star Fertility Partners, which in and of itself is then owned by Cortec Group, which is part of a private equity group. North Star Fertility owns Growing Generations, Circle Surrogacy, and Reproductive Possibilities. So they're all They might operate as independent companies, but they're all owned by the same parent. But let's dig into that a little bit further. They also own surrogacy.com, which if you go to surrogacy.com, it reports itself and purports to be a resource for potential surrogates run by surrogates for surrogates. And so it positions itself on its face to be this independent knowledge center to answer your questions. And they don't make it readily apparent that it's actually owned by the same parent company that owns 3 of the top surrogacy agencies in the country. And now listen, companies do these sort of thought leadership lead gen sites all the time. So I'm not saying that that's inherently bad, but I do personally believe that, especially in something so intimate, so high stakes, so high value, that should be like the billboard on your homepage. That should be disclosed. Like every woman going to that site wondering about becoming a surrogate should know that the people delivering this information to her own the 3 of the largest surrogacy agencies in the US and have a vested financial interest in her becoming a surrogate with their company.
Yeah, that sounds really tangled, not to mention kind of deceptive too.
In my mind, right? Like, so that is my opinion that is deceptive. I am sure they have great lawyers and they have all of the disclaimers in the right place. I was able to dig into the footer of the website and find in their terms and conditions was where I could find that they were owned by North Star Fertility Partners. But I did not see it directly on their homepage or any sort of page that if I were a surrogate, I would have readily been reading.
Well, having been married to you for so long, I know that you're very big into gardening and you dig a lot. So
Fair.
I don't think that that is organically or naturally something that folks generally get into that level of investigation. And, question for you, Sam. I mean, as a surrogate, you must have spent a lot of time in different communities and going through different websites. I mean, how much information did you know up front? Is this something that you would have found out on your own? How much information do you think a surrogate should have going into this process?
Think I would have known that. Even with a law degree, I don't think I would have dug that far because I wouldn't have thought that it would be needed. I did do research before I started my journeys, and what I got out of that research is about all the different agencies and what the guidelines are. I did not know that there was communities where you could talk about all this stuff and ask questions and learn about things until I was in the middle of my second journey. So I think had I had known that there was other resources, then things probably would have looked very differently for me for the first journey. And I don't know if all these groups were actually out there that long, or I'm just finding out about it. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I think, as we think about the procedures and what you actually go through, whether that be with an agency or through an independent journey, it's important to know all sides, all aspects of what you're going through. But talking specifically about an independent journey, Josh, what does that procedure actually look like? I mean, we went through it. What do you think a surrogate or a family of intended parents is actually going to have to navigate as they do things on their own?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it's going to look a little different depending on which perspective you're coming into that journey from. So if you're coming in as an intended parent, it's going to look slightly different than if you're coming in as a gestational carrier, if you're coming in as an egg donor. But what I would say is that the professionals, like the actual licensed professionals who make those journeys possible, who make them safe, who make them comply with all of the requirements set forth by ASRM, so on and so forth. They're the professionals you're going to work with, regardless of whether you're working with an agency or not. Your IVF clinic is ultimately the one who's going to make the medical decision on whether or not a surrogate is cleared for a transfer. Lawyers, bar licensed lawyers, are the ones who are going to ensure that there is a surrogacy contract. And you will have a lawyer as an intended parent, and your gestational carrier or egg donor will have her own lawyer that the intended parents will pay for. But that is going to happen whether you're working through an agency or not. The psych screening, right? That is going to happen by a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in reproductive psychology, or whatever the formal term is for it, that's happening whether or not you're working with an agency. Escrow should be managed by a third party escrow company that doesn't have anything to do with an agency. So when you talk about an independent journey versus an agency journey, I would say the foundation, right, the things that make that journey possible are all exactly the same, and in some places better when you're going independent, whether you're using an agency or not, right?
Well, I think you have more freedom when you do that because when you're going through an agency, they have their preferred people that they work with.
That's absolutely right. I think that, and we've talked about structural conflicts of interest and those sorts of things. Let's talk about psych screening for a minute, right? So when we went through our first journey, we were told that or not our first journey, but our first through the agency, we were told that our surrogate, our GC, had been psych cleared. So they sent her to a psychologist who they work with, who cleared her. When we did our journey with you, Sam, we went to a different psychologist who was in Minnesota because we had to, because that's how Minnesota works. She did the interview with you, but then she also said, well, I need to interview you, Josh and Daniel, and then we need to do a session with the three of us. And yeah, I was a little grumpy about that at the time because I was
You
like,
were a
what do you
lot grumpy at the
I
time.
was a lot grumpy at the time. Okay, that's fair. But because I was like, what do you mean? You get to decide if I'm like emotionally stable enough to be a parent? Like that doesn't happen if you're not going through surrogacy. And in hindsight, well, they're looking out for your best interest, Sam, to make sure that we're not emotionally ill-equipped to, deal with the ups and downs of what surrogacy involves and take it out on you, and making sure that we're prepared as a group to handle difficult conversations and the difficult thing that comes up. And most importantly, that three-pronged approach is the ASRM guideline. That
See,
is,
I didn't know that.
because a lot of agencies don't follow it.
Yeah, because I don't know if my other parents went through that, and we definitely didn't have a joint one. So I was a little grumpy about having to do that too, because I'm like, why do we have to do this? It feels extra. But now I'm thinking it's not. It felt like it at the time, but it's not.
Agree. I think that in hindsight, it was super beneficial, and we had to do it for both of our journeys with you.
Yep, we
With
did.
you,
We
right?
did. And I remember too, like saying, well, thinking, okay, so maybe that's fine for other people, but we're friends. We don't need this. And she was just telling me, like, that's a big reason why you do need this.
Yeah,
I think a
absolutely.
lot of people often think that going independent means they can just go around all of the traditional obstacles or guidelines. And really, that's not the case.
No.
In fact, in our experience, I think we got a much closer look at what was actually required. And we were able to follow those requirements with much better precision and clarity.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think, and I think that's such an important point. Like, independent does not mean getting around guidelines. It does not mean unsafe. It means picking your own providers and managing some of the heavy lifting on your own, but it does not mean unsafe. You can't get around ASRM guidelines.
Right.
Sam,
And let's go back to structural, like weird structural things in the industry. The deep referral relationships that agencies have with some providers is what makes it easier, in my opinion, right? This is just my opinion, but makes it easier for agencies to get around some of the guidelines, like the three-prong approach to a psych eval. They find providers who can rubber stamp GCs, who can rubber stamp egg donors to just get them through, to a match and to money in their bank account.
Sam, I'm curious, what do you wish could have existed when you started the independent surrogacy process?
I think like a list, because even though I had gone through it before and I knew what the steps were, I didn't know all the different timelines. And so I feel like when we went through it, we didn't miss any steps, but we definitely missed some timeline. And there's reasons for some of those timelines, like for example the life insurance. Like I didn't know that that was supposed to be in place before you start the shots, because I could have had an adverse effect and died. And then what would have happened? My family would have just been, I can't use that word, they would have been SOL.
We can bleep things in post, right, Daniel?
So I mean, like seriously, each and every journey even doing it 3 times, I learned something new with everyone. So even just being experienced, you don't know everything. And so it would have been nice to have like a step by step, this is what you need to do, this is when this needs to be completed by. And we did better our second journey.
We definitely did better our second journey.
Yeah.
So I remember when we first started out with the agency experience, you get a lot of information really fast. And certainly that information is like very academic or sometimes overly clinical. And so I dove into a bunch of different communities and spaces online, which I don't know if that was even a better decision because there's even more content out there, not all of which is easy to consume, but we dug our way through it. And I'm curious about you, Sam, from the surrogate side and as a carrier. You must have spent a lot of time in different GC communities. What do you think that carriers typically not know before they go into this process that maybe they should know?
Yeah, it's a lot. I didn't know anything because I never knew any other surrogates. I didn't know anybody who used a surrogate. So I was just really starting from scratch and whatever was on the internet. All I found was information about agencies and what the guidelines were. I had no clue that there was groups, Facebook and stuff like that where you could get information. Before I went through everything after I chose my agency was my agency had a support group online, which was great, but we were told what we could and could not talk about there as well. Like compensation, anything that's in your contract, you could not talk about. So it was really hard to know what's fair to ask for, what should I ask for, what things should I be looking out for. Like, for example, my agency said that all you got was 2 weeks for maternity leave or vaginal delivery and 4 weeks for C-section. It's insane.
Your body, again, I don't have those parts, but your body can't heal that fast, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy town.
No, I mean, people do it because they have to, because they don't have any other option, but it's not deal. So it was nice because I met a lot of people, but it was a lot of side conversations to get what I needed to get because in the main group, it was all rainbows and butterflies. You didn't hear a whole ton of the negative side because those people either got moderated out or they choose to leave the group. So I really didn't find out about any other groups outside of that one until I had into my second journey.
I just to put a finer point on this, Sam, in your opinion, who does it benefit to keep surrogates from talking about their compensation or surrogates and intended parents to talk about what they're receiving or what they're paying?
The agency, because then if we talk about it, you might find out how much money they're getting paid. And they're getting paid versus what we're getting paid could be shocking, like, and very unfair. Like, there's instances where the agency is getting paid more than the surrogate, and the surrogate is doing all the work. But how would you know that if you're not allowed to ask questions or talk about certain things?
As a surrogate, both independent and with an agency, you have a lot of thoughts about your first journey and the experience you had with an agency. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it really wasn't what I thought it would be. It was made to seem like we are here for you. We're going to hold your hand. We're going to be here through every step of the process. We're going to take care of you. And at the end of the day, that's just not what it felt like. And that is disappointing and it feels really icky.
Well, let me like I'm gonna push on something that you mentioned that I was actually gobsmacked when you told me. But when you started talking to your IP couple from Germany, the agency actually had rules about what you were allowed to talk about. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, we really had to keep it on a basic level and like there was a list of things that we were not allowed to talk about. But then after like legal, then we could talk about more things. But before we had went through legals, like we weren't supposed to talk about anything in the contract at all, which I kind of thought was funny because how are you supposed to get to know people or come to some sort of agreement when you can't even talk to each other? Like I feel like that's a conversation that needs to be had between the peoples, not just the attorneys, because again, like I'm a firm believer in your own best advocate, and sometimes things get lost in translation when things are going that way, and they'd be like, oh well, if you have something to say, like you could tell us, or you can tell your attorney. But again, things get lost in translation. So it felt weird. And that was kind of my first red flag, but I didn't really question it too much because I just thought that was the process, and this is what people did.
In my view, I mean, that's very bizarre, right? Like, so you're the surrogate, you're working with intended parents, you will be bound by a surrogacy contract, but you are not supposed to talk about said surrogacy contract.
Yeah, crazy, huh?
Seems, I mean, it seems like there's more going on in that demand to not talk about the contract than we're looking out for your best interests.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's numerous reasons. A, because if we talked, I might have found out that the agency also owns the law firm that represents the parents.
Wait, say more. Okay, so that can you just say more about that? That's wild.
Yeah. So the agency that I chose has a law firm that is owned by the people that own the agency, and they represent all of the intended parents.
That sounds like a major conflict of interest.
It is.
That's wild. And Sam, what people listening probably don't know, you have a law degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to pretend like I'm a lawyer because I certainly am not, but you do have a JD. And aren't, if you represent the intended parents, not, I mean, obviously you have a financial interest, but don't you have a legal interest to look out for their best interest? Like, isn't there some sort of a fiduciary responsibility there? But then they're also at the same time trying to claim that they're representing your best interest?
Exactly. So we don't have the full picture of what's going on to make an informed decision on if this is an agency that is going to be good for us. Had I known that, I wouldn't have chose that agency. And not only that, they also had in-house escrow. So many red flags, which I didn't know that till after the fact either.
Okay, so I have so many questions because I wanted to ask you, you said something that I thought was really important about self-advocacy, but now you brought up in-house escrow. And so some of the folks, listening to us right now might not even know about the escrow process yet. They're, still trying to figure it out. Can you just talk about what escrow is and why having escrow in-house is such a no-no?
Yeah. So escrow is all the money that the intended parents put in to an account to pay for compensation, your monthly stipend, anything that needs to be paid. That's what it's for, to guarantee that that money is there when it is needed. Again, same reason for why you shouldn't have in-house legal counsel. It's unethical and it's a conflict of interest to have it at the same place. There needs to be checks and balances, and when you have it all in one place, there isn't that checks and balances.
Yeah, so escrow is, just like if you put money into escrow to buy a house, right? It's supposed to be a third party that is overseeing this money to make sure it's getting paid out to the people who it's meant to be paid out to per a contract. And as a surrogate, you know that this is that the intended parents have the amount of money they need to pay my fee, to pay the medical bills, to pay my insurance, everything that's in the contract. And then when it's in house, like let's say the quiet part out loud, but there's a huge news story. It's from 2025, late 25, earlier this year, but I think it's called, the company was called Connections, right? But that was an agency that had in-house escrow. And allegedly the owner disappeared with many, many families' money that they had put into escrow, leaving surrogates unpaid, intended parents without the money to complete journeys, to start their journeys, seeds, which we can talk a lot about seeds because there's, interesting things about seeds, but that's the, professional organization that is, sort of supposed to oversee this industry. Even in their own rule says in-house escrow is a no-no. And
Well,
your agency had it in-house escrow.
yeah, but also owned by a law firm, so they really should have known better.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can, I just want to ask you one last thing about your experience, going through the agency, and then we can come back to some more of your surrogacy experience. But you said something about self-advocacy. And I guess this is a two-part question. Like, what does that mean, or what was your experience with that in the context of working with an agency? And what would you tell a surrogate about that, whether they're working with an agency or going independently?
Yeah. So again, I went with an agency thinking that these people are going to have my best interests at heart. They're not going to steer me wrong or guide me in the wrong direction. And they're supposed to be here to make things easier for me. And that just wasn't always the case, which was frustrating. When there was problems, I just feel like I had to handle a lot of things that my case manager should have. And I'm not going to say she didn't at all. There was times where she did, but not to my satisfaction. And so for me, being the person that I am, I rather talk for myself because I get stuff done and not everybody is as forward as me. And so that was hard to sit back and just like keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth when I could have just made one phone call and it would have been done. And so I think that regardless of if you use an agency or if you do it yourself, you have to be able to speak for yourself. And it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to pause and be like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right, or this isn't working for me. And I just feel like a lot of surrogates feel like once they enter into these agreements, they have to do everything that the parents want them to do and everything that the agency says they need to do. And that's just not true. You are your own person with your own mind, and you can ask questions and make informed decisions for yourself. So, Danny, you could have just shared your story and moved on. Why build a platform?
Because parents already have enough challenges. I mean, I'm seeing that on the other side. We have two beautiful kids, and I'm grateful for them every single day. But parents have enough challenges. And we've lived through the surrogacy experience, so we've seen firsthand how fragmented it is. Parents deserve better. We wanted to create that space for intended parents, for surrogates, for egg donors to come together and have a lot more transparency to their experience, to enable them to have a direct connection to the people that are going to be meaningful and impactful in their lives and the creation of their families.
Sam, let me ask you a similar question. But you're helping us build this, right? This is, something I hope you're passionate about. I mean, that's why you're here helping us. But what do you want gestational carriers who are listening to this to know about why you're doing this?
Yeah, I think that you hear a lot of people say going independent doesn't help anybody but the intended parents. And I just don't think that's true. That could be true for some people, but it's not true for everybody. There's always more than one way to do things. And like I said before, to me, it's about advocacy. No one can advocate for you better than you can advocate for yourself. And that's just it for me. And at the end of the day, my agency experience, I didn't feel like a person. And that doesn't feel good. And I don't want anybody to ever feel like that because we're not just bodies. We are people.
Josh, so we've been through all the ups and downs in this process. And if I think of where we were in 2019 to where we are now, aside from how much saggier my skin has gotten, we're totally different people.
How exhausted we are all the time?
What would you say to a couple like us from 2019 who's just starting their journey, just starting to research? They may not be sure who to trust. What are you going to tell
I
them?
think there's two different tracks here and two things. The first one is you can do this. And with perseverance, there will be a lot of ups and downs, but you can get to the finish line. you can get to the finish line, even in what seems like the darkest moments of this journey, because anybody who's been through this journey, even the most successful journeys, will tell you that there are peaks and valleys throughout the process, and those valleys, the downtimes, they hurt a lot. It's very emotionally intense. And so first and foremost, I'd say keep your eye on your end goal, and you will get there, and you can do this. The second thing I would say is knowledge is power. And don't let your lack of understanding of the process, don't let your lack of understanding of what needs to happen force you to do things you are not comfortable with, or make you think that you can't do this without spending some amount of money that's either difficult for you to spend or that you don't have to spend. That if you decide doing this independently is the path that's right for your family, you can do this. The resources are out there. We are one of those resources. We are not the only resource. Those resources are out there. The knowledge is out there. And the more you know, the more smoothly you can manage this process. You do not have to depend on people who have other vested interests that are not always aligned to your own to get through this process. You can do it on your own. And however you choose to do it is okay. So, Danny, close us out. This has been a great episode, but where do we go from here? Like, where is Pineapple Family going from here? And what does the world look like if this all works?
Our goal at the end of the day is to make independent surrogacy and egg donation a much more transparent, accessible, and human-centered process for every family. Sam, what about you?
I think for me, the biggest thing is access. This is a very, very expensive process. I don't have to tell you guys that. And so my hope is that this allows this to be more accessible to more people.
Josh, what about you?
My long-term goal is that independent surrogacy and egg donation becomes the default for most families. And the agency model becomes more like a luxury concierge service for those people who want it or need it, but that independent becomes the default.
If you're thinking about becoming a surrogate or an egg donor, whether it's your first time considering or you've been through it before, you can sign up right now at pineapplefamily.org. Nobody assigns you to a family. You see their full profile. You choose. That's the whole point.
And if you're not ready for that yet, come find us in our community, The Grove. It's free. It's always going to be free. We don't sell ads or your data. And it's full of people who have been exactly